Vice President Kamala Harris is set to make her first speech before the United Nations next week. She's expected to appear virtually at the 65th Commission on the Status of Women. The annual meeting focuses on the promotion of gender equality and empowerment. The Biden administration is expected to take a different approach to working with UN allies on women's issues compared to the previous administration. The last administration sought to curtail reproductive rights it felt promoted abortion access. For more, let's bring in Deputy Press Secretary for the Vice President, Sabrina Singh. She joins us from the White House. Hi there, Sabrina. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on today.
So what are some of the themes the Vice President will cover in her UN speech next week?
Well, I hope that everyone tuning in now tunes in next week for her speech. I think she's going to talk about the progress that this administration has made and really emphasize that we are here to work with our allies around the world. As you said right before you had me on, we are committed, this administration is committed to working with the United Nations and our allies all across the world. And so while I'm not going to preview her speech right now, I hope that folks do tune in next week. I think, it's going to be one of her first addresses and one of her first major addresses as Vice President. So tune in.
Sabrina, I want to turn to the topic of this surge that we're seeing of migrant minors at the southern border. On Monday, CBS News reported that a record 3,200 migrant children were stuck in Border Patrol custody, with nearly half of them being held past the legal limit of 3 days. Social distancing measures have reduced the number of beds that can be used in shelters. But what is the Biden administration's plan to address this?
Well, let's talk about our plan, and that is one that is humane, that is one that is fair. We are not an administration, unlike the last one, that is going to turn away unaccompanied minors at the border. We are here as an administration to help reunite families. And let's talk about why people are coming to our borders. We know that people are fleeing violence and persecution in their countries at home. There were just 2 hurricanes that hit in the fall that have displaced people. People are seeing that we are getting out of this pandemic, and they are looking to pursue the American dream here. And while I think we have had, we are approaching this migrant, issue at our border in a very different way than the last administration. Things are going to take time. And so, we are going to continue to work to restore security at our borders and also allow and begin to process people so that they can have a safe place here in the United States.
Is it a bit of a mixed message, though, Sabrina, to say that you're going to be taking a different approach from the previous administration, a more humane, as you and others have said, approach? But at the same time, this is not the time to come to the United States. Are those two messages somewhat in conflict?
Well, I would say we're still in the middle of a pandemic, as you know. And so right now, and as you said at the top, we are struggling with an issue of beds. And so we want to make sure that people, when they come to our country, that they are able to do so safely, that they are processed quickly. And we are still digging out here of this pandemic. And so we are asking people to pause on coming in right now, but we will be welcoming folks when we can process them and make sure that they are going through the proper, like as DHS and holding, we're trying not to hold folks for more than 72 hours in our facilities. But we want to make sure that this is a humane and fair process, and we are not turning away unaccompanied minors at the border. And we are going to continue to make sure that that is our policy, unlike the previous administration.
I want to turn to this question of vaccine hesitancy. So Vice President Harris has been touring the country virtually to promote vaccines while acknowledging what she called the, quote, righteous reason Black Americans in particular have for feeling hesitant. She's also imploring them to get vaccinated. Tell us more about the administration's efforts to address vaccine hesitancy or reluctance in minority communities.
Well, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and many folks across our administration are acknowledging that there is vaccine hesitancy and encouraging folks to get the vaccine when it is their turn. It is safe. It is a vaccine proven and developed by our medical professionals, our scientists, our healthcare professionals, and most importantly, it will allow our country to return to a sense. I think what everyone is asking for is, when are things going to go back to normal? Taking the vaccine when it is your turn is that first step. And so we are so proud of our partnerships with community health centers and our states and mayors and governors who have been so fantastic about helping us open up mass vaccination centers and community health centers so that more folks in these states and cities can get the vaccine when it is their turn.
So finally, Sabrina, I want to ask you about something that has been in the news prominently here in recent weeks. So Vice President Harris was born in Oakland, California, and that is one of the cities where we have seen this recent spike in violent attacks targeting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, particularly elders. And I wonder, you know, as a woman of South Asian heritage, what is her, and Black heritage, what is her reaction to these attacks in her hometown, and not just in her hometown, but in New York City and in other places across the country as well? Because, as you know, advocacy groups have reported an uptick in these kinds of incidents since the start of the pandemic.
Well, I have to, first thank you and the network for covering these horrific and racist attacks against Asian Americans. It is something that the Vice President and this administration is very concerned about. And as you mentioned, a daughter of Oakland, the Vice President is very concerned that this is happening in her hometown. And, as an administration, we are monitoring this. We are working with our law enforcement partners to make sure that Asian Americans feel safe and that they should, and we encourage them to report these crimes. But also, in the first week of Joe Biden being president, he signed a presidential memorandum condemning these hate crimes and attacks against Asian Americans. And what we can do as an administration, and why I'm incredibly happy that you asked me this today, is we have to keep talking about these attacks, and we have to keep speaking out against them, and we have to keep bringing light to them to educate people about what is happening in their hometowns and make sure that these attacks stop. So I know that there are groups like Stop AAPI Hate that are working with our Justice Department, that are in talks with our administration to make sure that we are doing everything possible to reduce these attacks and address them and hold people accountable.
And Sabrina, I mean, just on that point, realistically, what is it that the federal government can do, or the Biden administration can do, when, after all, you're talking about something that has existed in this country, for decades, if not centuries, this sort of anti-Asian bias that is not something that can necessarily be legislated away?
I agree, and it cannot necessarily be legislated away, and that is why, as I mentioned, our Justice Department is meeting with these groups who are on the front lines, addressing these hate crimes, talking to these Asian Americans who have been targeted. I think what the most important thing this administration can do and is doing is bringing attention to this issue. The more we talk about it, the more people understand what's going on in their communities and their cities, and the more we can do to address it. And part of that is partnering with our law enforcement officers through education programs, through making sure that people are held accountable, and to making sure that our Asian American communities feel safe. One of the things that I've been so heartened by is that I just read a story, I think in a California paper, saying that neighbors have rallied around a family that was being targeted, and is helping this family, whether it's walking their kids with them to school or driving them places that they need if they don't feel safe. And the federal government and this administration is going to continue to talk to and partner with those groups that are bringing awareness about this issue.
Sabrina Singh, Sabrina, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.